In this session, we're going to look at psychology, and the topic we're going to cover is lifespan development. Let's get into it. So, our key objectives for this particular session, we're going to explore human development, understand the gender role development, and also describe the cognitive development. Then we shall also tackle the moral development, and last but not the least, we are going to appreciate and explain the social and emotional development. All right. When we are trying to explore human development, we must first understand what it means when they say human development. So, in simple terms, development is simply an improvement. So, human development, we are just trying to consider the change or the improvement that occurs in the physical, social, emotional, spiritual, or economical aspect of that particular person. So, in other words, we can say human development is just a growth and how a certain person is able to adapt to certain situations. So, now let's look at what lifespan development is. So, lifespan development is just a way people are able to grow and adapt to both good and challenging situations. So, when you're talking about this human development, it continues throughout the entire life or the lifespan of a particular person. So, there are many phases which occur or which a person undergo from conception to the time they die. And these changes are predictable during the lifespan of a certain particular person. So now, when you're talking about development, there are certain things or factors which can affect it or which influence this development. And certain factors can be genetic, some can be environmental factors. However, it takes place in a defined manner, and these defined manner are different aspects of motor development and also emotional behavior. People are able to develop in the way they speak, so that is speech, how they behave socially, and also the concept development, how they are able to attain certain goals, and also intellectual development. So, in simple terms, these are the aspects in which a particular person is able to grow: motor development, emotional development, or emotional behavior, social behavior, concept development, goals, and intellectual development. All right. So, as we know that children grow from the periods like prenatal, that is before they are born, a child or a fetus rather, who is in the womb, they are growing, that is prenatal period. And once they are born, that is now postnatal period. So postnatal period includes infancy, when the child is just below the age of 7 years, babyhood, childhood, until the period of puberty, and this goes on until they reach adulthood. So development during prenatal period happens in an orderly condition. We know that a child or a fetus rather who is in the womb, that fetus is made to grow under certain condition, the condition that is there in the amniotic fluid. So it means that the temperature and other factors must be regulated. The nutrition of that fetus must be regulated in that amniotic sac. Alright, so early development is more critical than late development. According to Erikson view, he stated that childhood is the scene of man's beginning as man. So, childhood is a scene of man's man's beginning as a man. This implies that if a child during that childhood or during that early agehood is not nurtured well, that child won't grow well even in adulthood. The behavior won't be okay, or the way this child is able to grow won't be right as a society expect. So when they have to control this particular child, it is when the child's behavior is monitored, the way they behave, the way they speak to elders, the way they are able to interact with their fellow friends. And this is the period when a child is cancelled, telling a child what to do and what not to do, what is right and what is wrong. So there are certain factors that are able to influence the lifespan of this development, and these factors are hereditary factors. So when you're talking about hereditary factor, heredity is just something to do with genetic. So hereditary factors, a child is able to carry some genetic endowments from his or her parents. For example, the behavior of the parents through genetics, the way they used to behave, those traits can also be transmitted to that particular child. So heredity factor is one of the factor that is able to influence the lifespan development of this child. All right. So there is what is known as the genetic code. So the genetic code is just a stipulation that provides the base on which the brain and the body grow and manifest in observable appearances, and also the behavior in one's lifespan. So that is just the genetic code. So this is better understood when we are dealing with human anatomy, because in human anatomy we'll understand better by genetic code, those nitrogenous bases, and how they are able to be governed by this same genetic code. Okay, all right, so that is better understood, but it is just the stipulation or the set of rules by which the genes are transmitted, or how you are able to know which genes, or maybe which nitrogenous bases rather, should be arranged in a certain way so that a certain characteristic can be portrayed. Alright, so the child is able to carry genetic endowment, as we said, from his or her parent. And inherited brain damage or birth defect tend to influence a person's behavior in lifespan. So this is what I was explaining. Like, for example, the child who is growing can get to inherit certain behavioral patterns of their parents. So let's say the parents, maybe they never had respect for their elders during their young age. So there are certain traits which a child can adopt or rather inherit from that kind of behavior. Then other factors that are able to influence the lifespan development of a particular person are environmental experiences. So this is the major contributor and something that is able to affect a person's characteristic, the environment, because during the earlyhood of a child or a particular person until adulthood, the person is exposed to different kinds of behavior in the environment where they are staying or where they live rather. So the way that environment is going to affect that child will be much diverse as compared to when to the way they can be affected with genetic factors. So may be the major effect of person's characteristic and being unique to one person's only and common to many people. For example, a man who lives in a fishing village and works on fishing boat, he experiences his experience rather of the living in that village will be shared experiences like those of other people living there. So we're trying just to understand that a certain person who lives in a certain environment, let's say where they farm, or maybe where they rear cattle or other livestock, or maybe in a certain village where they poach animals. So that particular man will be exposed to that particular environment and they'll adapt to it. So they'll get used to the way they live. Okay, early in the morning, they have to go for hunting. So when they come back, they have to fetch the firewood. When they're done fetching the firewood, they have to cook, then go to the farm. They have to they have to water the vegetables, there's a garden and all that. So that kind of exposure to that particular environment can affect them in such a way that they will be adapted to that particular environmental experience. So that is one thing we must understand there. And we also need to understand that there are certain factors that can affect the normal development of a human being, and such factors are environmental factors, and uh, they lead or rather interfere with the normal growth of a certain individual. So when you're talking about these factors that are able to interfere or influence the normal growth of a particular person, they are known as teratogens. So teratogens are just the factors that are able to affect the normal growth of a person. All right. So this word teratogens is just coming from teraton. Okay. So in relation to that, if we try to link it with that word, we'll try to get some glimpse and we'll be able to understand that when you're talking about teratogens, so there is just something which is influencing the other thing. So they are just factors that are able to interfere. So it is affecting a certain person in a particular way. So those factors which are able to interfere with the normal growth of a particular person, they are the ones which are known as teratogens. Right. So let's try to understand what happens during the child development. We said during postnatal period, that is the period after a person has already been born. So that is postnatal period. Prenatal is said before a person or before the child is born, but postnatal is when the child or the development that is able to occur after the birth of that particular child. Then developmental psychology refers to the maturation processes of an individual. So when you're talking about development in psychology, we are just trying to talk about the maturation, the growth processes of a particular individual. All right, let's look at gender role development. As we know, as these children are growing in this particular environment, they are exposed to a certain culture, or they get exposed to certain roles which are perceived maybe to be done by a particular gender or a particular sex, or according to the sex of that particular child. So when you're talking about gender roles in development, we are just trying to consider the different types of activities which are related to either feminine or masculine. Feminine meaning that they are related to females, and masculine meaning that they are related to just males. So these are just activities that are perceived by the society that okay, this particular activity must be done by a female and this must be done by a male. I'll give an example of a certain activity. Long time ago, cooking was just perceived to be a feminine role, meaning that it was only done mostly by females. It was almost a taboo for a male to be found busy in the kitchen, cooking, dealing with pots and all that. But now that the world, or should I say the country, is developing, so we get to understand that even males can cook and even become maybe better cooks. So in that rationale, we can say gender roles can affect a particular person in a certain way, because when you consider hunting, long time ago, ladies were not allowed to go for hunting, to go for bush poaching and all those activities, because those activities were related to being masculine laws, meaning that they can only be done by males. But it is only now that many activities can be done by both gender. Right. So gender roles in societies are typical or accepted in relation to values, traits of culture or the environment. So they are accepted according to the values. When you're talking about values, values are just the ideas that a particular society is able to perceive to be right or not right. So those are values. So here is an example. Well, let's consider how men's lifestyle change. So both the acceptable, such as length of hair and also the amount of facial hair, are different in recent years depending on the society's whim. Alright, so gender roles in development is considered with basic processes to understand the broader issues in shaping individuals' relationship. These relationships can be social aspects or sex roles. Okay? So sex roles are just certain activities or certain things that can only be done by virtue of being a male or a female, being a woman or a man. For example, a woman can be impregnated, but a man can pregnant. A woman can conceive, but a man cannot conceive. So that kind of a trait or that kind of a role can only be done by a woman, because it is only a woman, because of or by virtue of how the body is made, the biological and the physiology of that particular body is what is making that woman to conceive. But a man cannot conceive because of how this man is made physiologically. So children are exposed to various factors which influence their attitudes and also the behavior regarding the gender roles. So in most societies, we discover that children are taught to behave in a certain manner. I'll give an example of a cultural setup where children are taught to kneel down or to respect elders, or maybe kneeling down when they are greeting elders, or kneeling down when they are getting something from elders. So that is a particular attitude they are exposed to. So they are trained, or rather they are nurtured to portray that kind of behavior and to grow with it. So the attitude and the behaviors are learned from home, as a certain proverbs say, when you're dealing with behavior, it begins from home. So they say charity begins at home. You can't go somewhere and they expect you to behave in a certain way instantly when you have never portrayed that kind of behavior from your home or where you come from. So it is very difficult even to adapt because charity begins at home. The kind of behavior you portray to your parents at home, to your elders at home, that is the same behavior you go with even to other places where you'll be. Alright, so the behaviors, the attitudes are learned from a particular home and they are reinforced by the child's peers. These are just children's friends, the school experiences, and also the media. And we must understand that the media can play a major role in influencing a particular behavior or attitude in that particular child, because due to technological advancement, many children are exposed to different kind of lifestyle which is portrayed in films and also on other social media platforms, where they are able to fetch those kind of entertainment and also kind of videos they watch. So those kind of videos, for example, if we are considering maybe a girl in this particular case, a girl, due to that technological advancement, they watch movies, Indian movies, and they are able to see the way those people are dressing, maybe in miniskirts. So that particular girl, due to that kind of pictures, or rather kind of behavior which is portrayed by those people in the film, that girl can even imitate that kind of behavior, and they can also start doing the same, acting the same, and also wearing the same kind of dressing or dress code. So the media is able to play an important role in influencing the attitude and also the behavior of a particular child. Okay, so here let's understand what it means by gender identity and gender scheme. So when you are dealing with gender identity, we are just trying to understand, or rather appreciate, how the child's understanding of their virtue of being male and female. So under gender identity, a child must understand that they are male, and because they are male, they should dress in a certain or in a particular way that would make them look like a male and not a female. I'll give an example of a male wearing a wig. So that is not right, because according to gender identity, they must understand that they are males, and wearing wig is not for male but for females. A male wearing skirt, that is not the kind of dressing. Of course, women can wear skirts, but it is kind of awkward to see a male wearing a skirt, because according to society setup, a male cannot wear a skirt. Skirts are just for females, dresses are just for females. So gender identity is just the child recognition, trying to make them understand that they are male or female. Then when you're talking about gender scheme is something to do with knowledge, your cognitive, your thinking. So gender scheme are just cognitive frameworks that reflect children's experience with their society's belief about attributes of males and females. And this could include instructions from parents. So here we're just trying to understand the knowledge which a person, or a child rather, is able to gain from the society through experiences and the beliefs, the attributes of them being male and female. And this kind of knowledge is passed on from parents to offspring through instructions or through observation. So a child is able to observe or is able to be taught. as we know that there are different kind of learning. So a child can learn under supervision or under instructions, and that is guided learning. But there's also a kind of learning where a child is just able to imitate. They are being trained or being given instructions, but they can just observe and they're able to imitate that kind of behavior. So in that aspect, that is still learning, and they're able to learn through observations of how male and females should behave. All right, now let's look at gender scheme theory. So when you're talking about gender scheme theory, these are just theories that children develop, or these are just theories rather, where you get to understand that a child is able to develop a certain recognitive framework reflecting the beliefs of the certain society and characteristics of roles for females and males. So gender scheme theory, they are just theories that are able to stipulate the cognitive framework, or rather the I can say the rules or the values of a certain particular society concerning the roles of male and female. So this gender the gender scheme, it can affect a certain child socially. Okay, so it can affect the social information of that particular child. And an example is a child with firmly developed gender schemes tends to recognize the behavior of others as either males or females. So just through the behavior of how their peers or friends are acting or they are behaving, this particular child has that cognitive framework. That child has that understanding that, okay, this is a female or this is a male. All right, let's now look at gender stereotypes. So gender stereotype, these are just cultural beliefs about differences between women and male. And one thing we need to understand about gender stereotype is that this is irrational and illogical differences between women and men. So they are not as standard, or should I say they are not perfect, but they are illogical and irrational. So the cultural beliefs about differences between women and men are what are known as gender stereotype. Then when you're talking about gender differences, we are just trying to understand the differences in behavior as portrayed by females or males, and often perceptions of these differences can be exaggerated by gender stereotypes. For example, I can give a gender stereotype whereby I can say males are strong. So even when a male is experiencing pain, they should not cry. So that is just a gender stereotype. Seeing a man crying, people would start laughing at him, or it won't be perceived to be logical or rational. But seeing a woman crying, because women are perceived to be emotional and weak, but a man perceived to be strong, and a man should be someone who is energetic, strong, confident. So it will be awkward to see a man crying. So those are just the perceptions of the society, and they are just exaggerations. So we can call them gender stereotype. Okay, so when you're dealing with cognitive development, we are just trying to refer to how a certain person is able to perceive, think, and gain understanding of his or her own world. And this can be through genetic or learned factors, for example, exposure to the environment. So as I mentioned earlier, cognitive development is about thinking. It's about understanding the knowledge a person is able to get from the world or from the society where they're exposed to. Then we must also understand that the areas of cognitive development are information, processing, intelligence, reasoning, language development, language development, and also memory. Okay, so those are the areas of cognitive development, something to do with how a person is able to process information, the intelligence of that particular child, which is known as the cognitive intelligence, or we can call it IQ, intelligence quotient of a particular person. The reasoning, how they are able to think and come up with a reasonable idea or come up with a reasonable resolution, how they are able to understand something and work out using their own mind, how they are able to understand different and learn different languages. So that is just language development. And we must appreciate that prenatal period, it begins from the time fertilization takes place to the time that particular child is born, and these cognitive abilities are able to take place and shape that particular child during that prenatal period. So there's a certain myth that the intelligence quotient of a particular child is gotten from the parents. So in that rationale, it means that if maybe the mother was dull, even the child would maybe the intelligence of that particular child won't be that so much effective. So that is just a myth, because according to society, they're able to understand that the cognitive abilities of that particular child are able to be gotten from the child during that prenatal period. So through genetic means, the child is able to gain some cognitive abilities from parents. Alright, so development is able to take place during prenatal period, and this happens orderly. So you can't just be born now and learn everything or understand everything. So this takes place in a certain systematic manner. Alright, so this kind of cognitive development has been studied in different ways in trying to understand how a child is able to grow. And the oldest cognitive development is through intelligence test, that is IQ. And this IQ was proposed or was discovered by a certain person known as Stanford Binet, or Binet rather. Okay, so this was a person who discovered IQ. So IQ just stands for intelligence quotient, and it was adopted to be used in the United States by a psychologist, Lewis Teman, and that was in the period 1877 to 1956. Okay, so when you're dealing with IQ, so there's a certain way in which this particular IQ can be calculated. For example, this Stanford Binet was able to come up with a certain formula to calculate IQ. According to him, he said that whenever you want to calculate IQ, you must first understand the mental age of a particular child and also the chronological age. So he came up with a formula which I'm going to write here. So according to him, IQ was equal to the mental age over the chronological age. So this is the formula you can use in order to calculate IQ. Then you can multiply it with 100 if you want to find a certain range for the IQ. So this was the formula. IQ is equal to the mental age over chronological age. Alright, now let's look at moral development. So moral development, you are now trying to understand or learn what is wrong and what is right, and how you should act on those two different situations. So it is a 3-level, and each level is divided into 2 stages. Okay, so there's a theory which was proposed under moral development by this psychologist known as Lawrence Kohlberg, and that was in the period 1987. So according to him, he said that, or he posed that moral dilemmas to different age groups in order he posed moral dilemmas rather to different ages groups in order to assess their stages of moral development. So when you're dealing with moral dilemma, you're just trying to understand the differences that exist between how a certain person should behave in relation to what is right and what is wrong. Those conflicting ideas about how a person should behave morally, that is what is known as moral dilemma. Okay, so here is an example. A man who had a wife suffering from cancer, then a doctor prescribed a drug that could save the man's wife, and it was worth 2,000 kwacha. Then this man had only 1,000 kwacha, but the pharmacist refused to sell it to a reduced amount, which was 100 kwacha, nor to let the man pay the balance later. So in desperation, the man broke into a pharmacy, stole the medicine, and brought to the wife. So let's look at this particular example here. A man who has a wife, and this wife is about to die. The wife is suffering from a severe condition which is very critical, cancer. Then the doctor has prescribed a certain medication. This medication weighs 2,000 kwacha. But a man goes to the pharmacist in order to buy the medicine, but this man has only 1,000 kwacha. But the pharmacist has refused that the pharmacist can't sell that drug at the reduced amount, 1,000 kwacha, unless 2,000 kwacha. And the pharmacist has refused also to lend or to give the man the medication so that he can finish the balance later. Then, because the man is desperate, he goes at night, broke into this pharmacy, then stole the medication and brought to the wife. So, in this case, who is wrong? Is it the pharmacist according to morals? Is it the pharmacist who is wrong, or maybe it is the man who is wrong for stealing the medicine? So this is something that can keep us or push us into a critical thinking, trying to understand who is wrong morally and who is not wrong or who is right. Is it the pharmacist who has refused to lend the man or to sell the man the medication for 2,000 and 1,000 kwacha? Or maybe it is the man who has stolen the medication who should be taken accountable for being wrong. So that is a food of thought. Let's try to think about it. All right. Another example here. A child at this level might say, the man should not steal the drug because if he does, he'll be punished. So this man is accountable for stealing and is reliable for punishment. That is throughout the pre-convention level, according to how a child's sense of morality is externally controlled, how a child is able to think. So a child would say, the man who stole me the medication is wrong and should be punished. All right, let's look at the stage 2, which is the instrumental orientation. So instrumental orientation is just there to express what is in for me, like in a certain position where you are when you're considering the right behavior. So you're just trying to talk about, or express rather, what would be the benefit if you try to do a particular thing. So by whatever the individual believes to be in their best interest. So a certain person, as they are growing, they are able to have that mindset of thinking, okay, once I take this step, what will be in for me? Like, what am I going to gain in the end of the day? Okay, so that is about instrumental orientation. So you might try to also think in a certain way, like, should the husband have done that or not? So as you grow, you'll find that you try to reason with the situation. Okay, this man wanted to save a life which is dying, so maybe he was right to steal the medicine, or he was wrong to break into a certain farmer. So that is about moral dilemmas and how they are able to affect the lifespan of a particular person. All right, there is also what is known as pre-convention level of molarity. So under pre-convention level for molarity, you are just trying to understand the earliest stages of development. And according to psychology, earliest development age is before 9 years of age. Okay, so under this pre-convention level of molarity, a child is nurtured, who is just below 9 years old. And according to the stages, number one, the first stage a child should be nurtured, it's about obedience and punishment. A child is taught that for every action they do, if it is good, it will be acceptable. But if it is bad, they will be liable for punishment. Then, a child is made to believe that whatever a certain individual or whatever a person does should be in their best interest. Okay, so there are two stages here. The first one, we said it is about the obedience and punishment. So a child is made to obey, then by whatever action or the action they do, whether good, if good, they'll be rewarded. Then if it is bad, they'll be punished. So that is the first stage of the pre-convention level of molarity. Then when you're talking about stage 2 about reasoning. So reasoning is able to show a limited interest in the needs of others, only to the point where it might rather further the individual's own interest. So about reasoning now, this is a stage where a child should now begin to think, okay, if I do this particular action, how is it going to affect my friends or the people around me? So that is the second stage. And the concern for these other people is based on the loyalty. So you're just trying to consider the intrinsic respect. Okay? Instead of a common saying, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, the mentality. So the child is able to be taught in a certain way that they should whatever they do, they should think for others, like how it is going to affect other people and what would be the consequences. Alright, here's an example. A child is asked by his parent to do some chores, right? Then the child asks, "What is in for me?" And the parents offer the child maybe money or an allowance. So that is more like a training. You're just trying to train a child in that particular way. So it is an incentive you're giving the child, and that child will be used to it. So each and every time they will be asked to do a particular chore, they will be asking, so what am I going to gain at the end of the day, or what will be in for me? So the parents, when they give that particular child maybe the money or something, so that behavior will start building up till to a point whereby that particular child won't be able to do that chore without money or without that incentive. So that is what we need to understand. So aside looking at the pre-conventional levels of morality, we have also what are known as the conventional levels of morality. For pre-conventional levels of morality, we said it is about the child developing from the prenatal stage to the time they are born. But with conventional levels of morality, we are now trying to understand the behavior of this particular child during the early adolescence stage. So a child becomes aware of the social orders and also judge in terms of what supports and preserve society norms. So this is where a child now is able to understand and judge that this is right, this is not right, this is allowed by the society, this is not allowed by the society. So a child at this stage is able to reason. So is it okay to steal the drug? As in the previous example I gave, is it okay to steal the drug because no one will think you are bad if you do it? Or if you don't, you let the wife die, you'll never be able to look anyone in the eye again. So this is a stage, the conventional stage is where now this child is able to understand and reason clearly by considering both the pros and cons of a certain situation. Alright, so as in the previous example I gave, a child, or rather should I say that particular person, will be blamed for by others. But what would probably blame himself, because he would have violated his own standard of honesty and hate another person for his own gain. So in the previous example I gave, of course it will be something of, let's say the person will be guilty of some kind because they have broken into someone's shop, a farmer's, stolen the medication, and they have violated a certain law, and they have violated also their own standard of honesty. But again, they would start thinking of, what if I could let this person die? Like the person was sick of cancer. What if she was now about to die, or what if she died? So in that rationale, we are just trying to understand both aspects. Okay, so stage 3, apart from the conventional now stage of morals, the pre-conventional levels. So we are now going to look at what is known as the good boy and the nice girl orientation. So children, every time they want certain approvals from others. For example, once they do something which is good, they want some certain approval, or they want some certain applause for them after doing that kind of thing, and they are able to act in a certain way to avoid the disapproval. So the emphasis is just placed on the good behavior and people being nice to others. Right, so people now are able to believe that some laws are just fair, which are just okay, but other laws are unjust. They are not fair and should be changed or eliminated. Then, when you're looking at the last stage, which is the post-conventional stage, the stage 5, which talks about the social contrast orientation, it is now a stage where an individual is able to judge morally in terms of the abstract of the principles and the ethics. Okay, so the world is viewed as holding different opinions, rights, and values. So there are certain standards that must be followed by a certain citizen or a certain person, and these standards are outlined or have been set by this particular society or the world rather. So it is of the duty of this individual to judge the morality in terms of those principles and ethics. Right. Then the other stage, which is the stage 4, it is about the law and order orientation. So a child is blindly able to accept the rules and conventions because of their importance in maintaining the functioning of a certain society. But most members of the society, they remain at stage 4, where the morality is still predominantly dictated rather by the outside force. So that is about the law and order orientation. So a child is just able to follow the law that they shouldn't kill, they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't do this bad thing, because that is how the outside force or the society has predominantly dictated to them. So they're just able to follow like that. So we must understand that those who do not promote the general welfare should be changed when necessary to meet the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And the principles of such individuals which they follow are abstract and ethical, not concrete, like in the case of the 10 Commandments, which can't be changed, but these are based on the inner conscience and rather external sources of the authority. Okay, so you must also understand that as far as the greatest good for the greatest number of people, this is achieved through the majority decision and inevitable compromise. So I'll give an example for a democratic government. So this is theoretically based on the stage 5 reasoning. Okay, stage 5 reasoning, that is the stage for laws and rules. So democratic government, let's say if more than 3/4 of this world want a certain law to be enforced, so that enforcement will be done in the best interest of that majority of people. Even when there is a minority of people who are against that particular law, they will have no say because the majority want it. So that is how it is able to influence in that rationale. Then there's also stage 6, which is known as the universal ethical principle orientation. UEPO, universal ethical principle orientation. So this is just to do with the abstract reasoning using the universal ethical principles, like the laws which should be followed, the justice, and also the obligations of a particular citizen. So laws are valid only insofar as they are grounded in justice, and the commitment to the justice carries with it an obligation to disobey the unjust laws. So people are able to choose the ethical principles that they want to follow, and if they do not want those kind of principles, they're able to violate those principles, and in the end they will feel guilty. So in that rationale, an individual will act because they know that this is morally right, and they will be able to avoid it so that they are not punished. But if it is legal, and if it is in their best interest, they're able to do it and also get to obey that law or get to protect the law. Right, now let's look at the social and economical development. So when you're talking about social and economical development, you're just trying to consider the change that will occur over time in children's ability to react and also interact with the social environment. So for example, at birth, the infants are able to portray those emotional responses like attraction and also withdrawal. So they're able to show attraction to situations which are pleasant or which are good and comfortable, and something which is able to arouse pleasure or stimulate them in a particular good way. But they're able to withdraw from those unpleasant situations that are considered to be bitter or physical discomfort. So attachment is the initial stage in social development, and that is positive. So we said withdraw and attachment. So they're able to withdraw and they're able to attach to certain conditions or certain things which are positive, which are good. Okay, that is attraction. But to emotions which are bad, a child is able to withdraw. So the measurement and the origin of attachment, so that is the infant. Infants are able to form the strong attachments to the person who care for them. So if they see that this person cares for them, they'll be able to get attracted easily to them. But if they see that or they notice this person does not care for them, they will eventually withdraw because they are not receiving that particular care which they want. Then characteristics for attachment, they were proposed by this John Bowley, that is in 1969, who proposed that attachment theory is described as a lasting psychological connectedness that exists between human beings. So that is according to John Bowley. So he shared the psychoanalytical view of Freud that every experience in a childhood have an important influence on the development and the behavior of that child when they grow. So according to Bowley, he believed that there are four different characteristics or characters of attachment, and these are proximity maintenance. So proximity, we are just considering the distance. So the desire to be near the people we are attached to, that is proximity maintenance. Then there's also safe haven, meaning that returning to the attachment figure for comfort and also safety in the facts of fear. For example, a child once is threatened or maybe gets afraid, that child is able to run to their father or their mother. So in that way, they're just trying to figure out like the safest place they can be. So they're able to return to their parents, and they are able to consider that with the parents they'll be safe. So that is safe haven. Just returning to the attachment figure for comfort and also safety. In fact, in cases where they are afraid or threatened, and also secure base. So this is just the attachment figure that acts as a base of security from which the child can expose the surrounding environment. So we are just trying to consider a certain base of security from which this child can expose the surrounding environment. Then there's also the separation distress. So when you're talking about distress in relation to separation, you're just trying to consider the anxiety that is able to come out due to the absence of that attachment. So we know that this attachment has some certain styles. So there are strange situations whereby a procedure for starting an attachment in a caregiver leaves a child with a stranger for maybe several minutes or several hours, then retains. Okay, so that is according to attachment styles. So it's just a procedure of studying the attachment in which a caregiver will leave that child alone with a stranger first for several minutes, then retains. Then when talking about secure attachment, that is strange situations, but secure attachment is just a pattern of attachment in which an infant or that particular child is able to see contact with the caregiver. Okay, so under strange attachment styles, under strange situations, that child can be left alone by that caregiver until the caregiver returns. The child will be there, but under secure attachments, after the child has been left alone by this caregiver, the child will start following the caregiver, will start seeking where the caregiver is, so that this child is near to the caregiver. So in strange situation tests, there are two things which there are two attachments which exist there. There's what is known as avoidant attachment and also resistant attachment. So avoidant attachment is just a pattern of attachment in which this kind of baby don't cry when the caregiver leaves. Okay? And they will be there until the caregiver returns. So when you're talking about avoidance attachment, you're just trying to understand a certain pattern of attachment where a child will be left by the caregiver, then they'll be slow to greet that caregiver when that person returns. But with resistant attachment, you are trying to understand a pattern of attachment where that particular child will refuse or reject to be comforted by that caregiver after the caregiver leaves them in a strange situation test. So resistant attachment, the child is rejected the child rejects or refuses the comfort of that caregiver after they come. But with avoidant attachment, this is where the child will not cry when the caregiver leaves, and when they return, that child will be like nothing happened, and they won't portray any kind of emotions, and they will just be there, and they won't even maybe greet the caregiver. So that is avoidant attachment. Okay, so there is what is known as disorganized or disoriented. It is just a type of attachment in which an infant will show a contradictory reaction to their caregiver after being reunited with the caregiver in the strange situation test. So I'll give an example here where the caregiver leaves, then they come. So a child will try to act in a different way, so that because the caregiver had left them there, they will be maybe rude to the caregiver because they had left the child. So that is disorganized or disoriented. So they'll just act in a contradictory way, in an opposite way to what the caregiver would expect. Okay, so when you're dealing with the social development of the child, children are able to acquire and practice many skills essential to the effectiveness of the social development. Relationships with other children are formed, e.g., when they are at school, and they're able to form those close affective ties. But in contrast to Sigmund Freud's psychosexual stages, which were proposed by Erikson, describe the impact of social experience in the lifespan of that particular child. So this is where we end, and here are the references if you want to study more about lifespan and development. Okay, so don't forget to subscribe. If you want to subscribe to Meticulous Study Hub, there's a number down here and the email for different programs, different years, and different study materials. As examples here for Cambridge and also for Cambridge International and also for local or Zambia standard education. Thank you.